I have no idea what I'm talking about. I got some hints from you. So I titled it this, and then 2 hours ago I decided to put in, does this work? Yay! Because I thought, slowly wearing wheel, I thought the wheel of the Dharma, and then I thought, oh, I'm going to talk about bliss symbols, and so this is the bliss symbol for the wheel of the Dharma. It came ultimately because we have this tractor, and we had this as a primitive, and I work with the people who developed, and go use the Wikipedia if you don't know what bliss symbols is. No, we're going to find out shortly. There is actually one of these in Bliss with H, but it means pizza. Long ago, in 1998, God help me, I did the original proposal for encoding Bliss in Unicode. Blissymbol was a constructed language invented by a guy who started out his career in a concentration camp and ended up in Australia via China, and thought that all of the world's problems were caused by people not communicating properly, so he invented this language with no pronunciation. It was just symbolic, and he thought this would contribute to world peace. It failed to do this. But in the 1970s, a woman in Canada discovered that she could use it with non-speaking children. People with cerebral palsy, for instance, who were unable to actually use their mouths and other things to speak, and might or might not have much ability to use their other limbs to indicate anything. But Bliss is a symbolic language, back then we had 896 characters worked out for this. And you can see here, I mean, this is a squirrel, and that's fire, and that's a pictogram for a pear, and that is, I don't know what that is, and this is some water, and then there's a heart, which means feeling, and various types of buildings and things with wheels, and these are faces, and that's the neck, and that's the cheek, and that's the forehead. So it works. I mean, I know non-speaking people who use this as their primary means of communicating with anybody. And back in 1998, we proposed this. And one of the things that the committee discovered was that they were still creating new characters, so 896 wasn't it. And they basically said, you should go away and create all the additional characters you're going to need, and then come back to us. And it's now 20 years later. And in that time, so this is some more stuff about, so you have these basic primitive things: house, medical, knowledge, money, plant, and book. And then you can combine them to make, these are bliss characters, and you can combine bliss characters to make bliss words. This will be a hospital, I think. Yeah, because that's medicine. And this is university, because it's a place for giving knowledge. And this is a place where knowledge is back and forth. I don't know the English word for that. That's a bank, that's a greenhouse, and that's a library. I don't know what that was. So, some more things about bliss, because bliss is fun. So feeling and chair and taste, and you can combine multiple things. So this is thanks. So that's a feeling of giving. And that's giving knowledge again, and this is the building for the exchange. That's when it goes back and forth. It's not just giving knowledge, but it's exchanging back and forth. That's a resource center, which is something that some disabled people need to use. We have other features in the Bliss language, including things like the Bliss name, because if you're we know that in sign languages, people have certain signs for their own name. They don't just finger spell it out or whatever. And so we invented ways of being able to do this. So Charles Bliss, who invented Bliss, signed himself man Charles, but a Bliss user once called him Mr. Symbol Man. That's Bliss symbols there. That's the symbol for Bliss symbol. This backwards Z, because the top part is the sky, and the bottom part is the earth, and the line through it is a pen for writing, and then there's a mouth there, which is language. So here's Spider-Man, and then there's ways for disabled people to say things like shove off and piss off and shit and things like that, because it's a flexible language. I'm going to be doing a lot more with Bliss soon. In the 20 years, though, I've been working with the people who make who devise new vocabulary items for the users. Here's some more interesting stuff about Bliss that typographers might be interested in. The range of glyphs is very, very limited because the idea is to make sure that everything is visually clear to the user community, who may have various visual impairments as well. So we have all sorts of rules about the matrix square into which everything fits, and the space above and the space below, and what things you can do. We have these grammatical markers here, and grammatical markers, there's a special rule for what happens if it goes over a tall character, and then no character may be taller than that, and no character can be lower than that, and all sorts of stuff. Typographically, it's really quite fun. In the 20 years since then, this is the current font. And we're actually ready to go forward with this with a new proposal. Now, I have no idea how well or badly it will be received. The different colors here are alternating between the different letters of the Bliss alphabet. That is to say, you remember you saw the squirrel at the beginning, that the squirrel falls under the fire shape. This is a fire, heart, number, house, ear, arrows, wheels, big circles, small circles, blah, 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 and they get geometric. The alternating colors here are the alternating ones. So, for instance, there's only 3 characters that are under this letter. One is cloth, and the other is clothing, which is cloth with protection over it. You can't see this, and I'm not going to zoom in because it's impossible. And then a slanted one means numbers. Since in the 20 years, and this is where we get into how you get something through the Unicode Consortium, sometimes things go quickly and sometimes things do not go quickly. In the 20 years, we've had a 38% increase in the number of characters because we invented a whole lot. And over the last 4 or 5 years, we haven't hardly invented any. So we judge that it's time to go back to them. I don't really know how enthusiastic they're going to be about it. It's a conscript. It doesn't have very many users, although the users for whom it is used they have nothing else. It is a language, and when it's encoded, it's language enough that it would be able to take advantage of Google Translate, for instance, because it has actual, strings of Bliss characters making Bliss words can actually have direct glosses in other languages, and there's a syntax that's, and at the bottom here there's a whole bunch of grammatical markers for verbs and tenses and future and past and moods and all sorts of things. So we will be putting together a proposal in the next year or two. I'll be starting in January to put a proper proposal together, and hope that they will be interested in it. They've never been interested in it so far. I've received, previously, before the recent regime took away all the money from the National Endowment for the Humanities, there was money available which paid for a lot of the script work that I did. That has dried up pretty much hugely. But even in all this period, I'm not sure whether they really understood why it was important or the nature of the user community or what. They was never very enthusiastic about it. I don't blame anybody or think that this is wrong. And I don't know if some of you have seen the article, the horrible article, the Emojigeddon article, which sort of pits me against the Unicode Technical Committee, and that sort of ruined things for a while. It wasn't really, that was BuzzFeed's take on a very nice little interview that we had, and they turned it into this scandal, which wasn't any fun. It wasn't what I wanted to do. But we'll be putting this forward, and we'll see what the committee thinks about it. It's fairly straightforward. It doesn't break any rules, but you never know. And that's the big problem. And you were asking before, Johannes in the front here was asking when he invited me to this, I said, what do you want me to talk about? He says, well, there's a whole bunch of proposals that haven't gone anywhere. And people want to know why. And I said, well, okay, I can talk about that. This is what I'm going to talk about here. I have no idea when I started. Is it 5 minutes? Have I been going? I don't know when to stop, so I'm just trying to figure out, you can stop me at any point, but I didn't start a timer or a clock or anything. I don't have too many slides. And some of them I chose because I mean, I've written so many proposals. There's all sorts of things I could talk about which haven't gotten through yet, but I chose some which are particularly typographically interested because isn't that part of the fun? Anyway, Bliss is something I'm going to be doing a lot of work with in the next couple of years, partly because I'm going to be doing a PhD at Dundee, where I'll be proving that Bliss is a language. That's going to be an interesting PhD, I'll tell you that. I'm not coming for brunch tomorrow. No. A successful proposal was written in 2011, a proposal to encode additional runic characters in the UCS. And we have a number of runic characters. I'm going to go from the back. We have ash and ak and ech and these and os and stuff. I'm sorry, these are the ones that were already encoded. But on a particular a particular box called the Franks casket, they have these cryptogrammic versions of them. And this is a really important box. It's made of ivory, I think, or partly ivory anyway. And so we wanted to do that. And then there was also these extensions, which were invented by J.R.R. Tolkien. And not everybody who invents things gets to have them encoded in the Unicode standard. But Tolkien was judged to have been important enough to do that. And actually, I have published The Hobbit in 5 languages and made use of all of these in the runes around the corner, around the edges of the book, which say things. What does it say? It says, this is the story of a hobbit who took a year's journey, and it was written down from his memoirs by Tolkien and published by whoever. And I was able to use those letters in there. So far, we've decided that only Tolkien is the one who got to invent new runes. So these come from the 10th century. But this one pretty much sailed through. They were slightly concerned about whether or not there was any claim by the Tolkien estate on these things. That wasn't a thing, and so that just happened. And so all of these things have been encoded. There was no particular problem with this. And it's wonderful when you write a proposal and it sails right through. The curious thing is understanding why a proposal might not sail through. And the frustrating thing is when you write a proposal that is no different from a previous proposal that went through and the new one doesn't go through easily or quickly. And then you have to realize that, well, committees are all made of people, and the number of people sitting around a table may differ from year to year, and people may or may not have time to read a proposal thoroughly. Sometimes they come back to you and ask questions, and the answer, if it was in the proposal, that's a little frustrating. But you press on. And much more recently, I was doing some work with medieval Cornish, and I noticed that there were 2 different shapes for W, and I thought, well, what on earth is going on? And so I did some more research, and I discovered that there's actually 2 Ws. And I wrote this proposal called the Anglicana W, and earlier in that same year, I'd written some proposals, and they didn't go anywhere, and sometimes you don't really get feedback as to why it doesn't go anywhere. And that's kind of difficult. So honestly, when I put this in, I had no idea what they would do. Will they be happy with this? Will they not be happy with this? And I wasn't at the meeting or anything, so they basically have their meeting, and they look at it, and they talk about it, and then they decide, and then you find out later what happens. The Anglicana W is quite interesting. Here's some medieval Cornish, and here's an example of a particular manuscript which has all of the little bits and pieces that come from it. Now, here's the letter V, and you can see there it's a stroke coming down with a little hook around. It looks like a V, right? And then here's a W, and there's another W. And again, it looks like a V. You have the diagonal, and then the second diagonal, and the little bowl. And it looks like a W. It looks familiar to us, right? Well, now, back in medieval Wales, they had this other thing, which we encoded some years back, and we called it the Middle Welsh W, because we figured it pretty much was only there. And it is actually, graphically, it doesn't, in fact, can I see a B here? It doesn't actually differ from the letter B. no, that's that's an Anglican. No, okay, that's the Middle Welsh V, and that's one of them, and that's one of them, and that's one of them, and that is one of them. And if there is a B on this page, it'll look exactly the same. But then U and N look exactly the same as well. So when you're transcribing it as a paleographer, you have to know which it is, and so we do that, and we have this letter for it. The Anglicana W, which I have here, its origin is two of these sort of written at the same time. Now, it does not, in this handwriting, make any difference. I mean, he might, later on the following folio, he might write Gowinne with an Anglicana W. Worthy with an Anglicana W. It doesn't mean anything, but it's certainly, I mean, he's certainly doing something. Paleographically, this is, stroke down, and then curl up. But this is big curl over, and then curl over again, and then a little double bowl there, which shows that that's the two of these sort of stuck together on the end. Anyway, what happened was they were happy about it. They encoded it. No, stop. What is it doing? Why does it do that? I don't know why it does that. I don't do these things very often. I want to go back. There we go. They encoded it. They said, sure, you've proved that it exists. Now, I didn't prove that it had any semantic contrast, but at some point they decided that paleographically this was cool, this was okay. That the paleographers, and that's the really, really hard thing. To understand what the paleographic reason for encoding this is that it has a different origin. Our W comes from two V's, and the Anglicana W comes from two Middle Welsh V's, and those are not the same thing, and they have different origins and whatever. I was very curious, and this is where I'm trying to come up with something that's typographically relevant because of the audience that I said was here. So I went to type drawers, and I tried to find out, I was like, what are we going to do about this? Because nobody had ever said it in type before. And so I started out with this discussion. I think this is Baskerville, isn't it? Yeah, I like Baskerville a lot. And I said, here we have, these are the existing letters, and I don't know what to do about this. So, and I don't think these are beautiful by any means. This was just me going out trying to get the views of typographers as to what might be interesting. And I did actually get some interesting feedback. Andreas Stötzner, who is a very fine typographer, he presented this analysis and showed some ideas and things and compared it with some Fraktur German stuff that he knew about. And then I came back and I said, okay, well, what do we do? What if I'm using this element here and this element here? How can we stick them together? What do we do about the heights of things and things? I just wanted to know what typographers were interested in. And then here's a weird sort of bit of things with vertical. This is a failure. We would not wish to do that. But you could, I don't know. And then it's like, okay, what's the capital going to look like? It's like, well, that's a disaster. And then these are kind of hilarious. But this is what you do when you find something new. I mean, this happens to be Latin, which is why it's familiar and interesting to us all. But for anything, including AFK and anything that we've talked about before, to put something into type is really not so easy. You really have to try to figure out, it's like, well, what's going to work and what's not going to work? And then you've got Roman and italic, and which one of these is better, which is more legible. This one goes up, but that's a failure, but this is not a failure because that one isn't easy to read, but this one is okay, I think. And then I said, and then we have our code charts, which are based on times, so how can we, put them into the straitjacket, which is times? And so we got some more feedback, and this is various attempts at doing that sort of thing. And then this is what I'm using in my own publications now of the medieval Cornish thing, which is why I started all of this. And I'm using Baskerville for that. And so I've ended up with these things. It works okay if you read a text with it, and you're good at Middle Cornish, then you can read what's on the page and stuff. That went through really easily. Here's another one. This one went through amazingly easily. It was just some stuff that was found in Scots dialect dictionaries. There's some combining letters and an upside-down letter and a turned non-combining letter, and then two tacks. We have an up tack and a down tack, and this is just the left tack and the right tack. Sailed through. Nobody said a word. There was pictures of, the scans from the National Scots Dictionary, which is about 10 volumes long, and that sailed through. This one went through quite easily as well. It was another thing that I found in medieval Cornish. They would write a line of verse, but they wrote 2 lines along, and they put this thing between it to show that there's a break between the verse. And here's an example of it in Buenos Mariazic. The other verse is over here. The first, and then there's that. It shows and there we go. And go with. I don't know what that is. There's a V, a regular V. There it is. It sailed through. This one hasn't sailed through. This is quite interesting. In Middle Scots, they took, throughout Europe they used the long S, right? Oops, I don't want to do that. Throughout Europe they used the long S, and in Middle Scots they ended up having a kind of ligature for that. And what I knew that I had to do is I had to try to get them to not object by saying, oh, this is just a German letter, why don't they just use that? Now, the fact that these 2 forms are the forms that were used by the Scots printers. And this is 19th century printers, so they spent money, had somebody cut type for them in order to put them in their books that they expected people to read who were interested in the stories and literature of Middle Scotland. And they could have used a German letter, but they didn't. They went to the trouble of spending money to make these things. They could easily have got German typefaces and things. It was the 19th century. It was not hard to do. So this is part of the proposal where you have to sort of anticipate their objections and then give some sort of response in advance as to, it's like, okay, you're going to suggest this, but here's the thing, that the German character itself has its own history. It was a closely kerned long S and an S, and then they had this sort of ligature attached to it that you find in some 16th century Antiqua typefaces, and then you have ligatures of S and Z, and then this, what they call the Sulzbacher form, which is the one that everybody knows about. And so I have to argue, it's like these are not suitable for use in Middle Scots, and these are not suitable for use in German. I was talking to somebody earlier today and was saying, you ask any ordinary person, it's like, well, what does this look like? Well, I don't know. Would a German, if a German were to encounter either of these in a newspaper article, they'd read the newspaper article. They might pause, they might get used to it, but they certainly wouldn't think it was normal because they're used to this thing. And on street signs, they're used to this thing. And they're no longer used to these things at all. So that was me going ahead, and here's an example of what you do with various ligatures and things like that. And then I tried to come up with examples of how this looks normal for German and this looks normal for Scots, and they're not the same at all. So I put this through, and I thought, I have no idea whether or not they're going to like this proposal. Because I think I've made the case, right? Yes, they are related in some way because there's a long S and some sort of S-like squiggle, but they aren't the same and they aren't interchangeable, and you can't just say, use an open type feeder for Middle Scots because, InDesign's going to start supporting Middle Scots choices. That's not going to happen. And then you might, and so on and so forth. And so you go on and you... Then I finally came out, also I need a capital form. Now we do have the capital sharp S with which, whoops, no. Oh, stop. We have the capital sharp S with lots of people don't like. But here I actually found, I was reading, this is the Gospel of John. which next year will be 500 years old. Murdoch Nesbitt translated it from Middle English, from the 14th century Middle English, into 16th century Middle Scots in 1520, and so I'm going to be putting it. Why? This is how I discover things that I need to put into Unicode, right? So this is the scene with the Samaritan woman, and there is the word sir, and there is the word sir. And the woman says to him, so it's the beginning of a sentence, so it's going to have a capital letter, and it actually has this little curl over it. You can see there, part of the curl. So that's part of the paleographic thing, and here's the other one. And yeah, this is weird, but that's the fact of it. Because not only, one of the things that really sort of bugs me is that they don't assume that the Latin alphabet is casing. They like to have proof of the capital form as well as proof of the lowercase form. Even though if you only encode the lowercase form, then, for instance, if you're writing a scholarly article and you want to talk about the letter, you can't put the header at the top of the page. You can't set that in all caps or small caps or anything because there is no capital form of it, and so you end up with this thing that doesn't look very good. So my personal view is that everything in Latin should pretty much be, at least if it's used for ordinary text that's, meant to be read, should come as a pair. But no, you have to go and prove it to them. Although we didn't have to prove it to them for Coptic, where we made the same argument, and that was years ago. It took us a long time to disunify Greek from Coptic, but we finally did. And then we said, okay, well, here's the set, and we took all of the ones, including a whole bunch of Middle Coptic, Middle Egyptian words, which had been written using a variant of the Greek script, using some letters which were derived from Egyptian hieratic. So we sort of unified the Middle Egyptian stuff with the Coptic stuff because they're both using a derivative of this Coptic script and had some additions. And we just said, okay, and here's the capital and small form for all of them. Sailed through. Nowadays, doesn't sail through. Why is this? Nobody will give an answer. There isn't an answer. It means the committee doesn't think that it should happen that way, that you have to prove these things. So I ended up putting this in the proposal. And that seems to you okay. What's this? So that's just a bigger version of it and a bigger version of that. Now, where is the proposal now? Well, the last time they looked at it, they didn't accept it right away, and the feedback I got, which was sort of via WhatsApp from Debbie Anderson, she said, well, they want you to address the possibility of using sequences. Sequences of what? Sequences of S set and something? Sequence of long S and an S? How can I have a capital form with a sequence of a long S and an S when there's no capital long S? The frustrating thing working with the committee is that they said, explore the use of sequences. They didn't say what sequences. They didn't offer anything. They didn't think about it. And that makes it harder for the people who are doing it. Now, in fairness, the committee has a lot of work to do with emojis. We won't go there any further. And being as in Debbie Anderson's talk earlier, it is true that these are people who are sent by big companies, and they're interested in somehow making sure that what gets encoded is relevant, which may or may not be why Klingon may or may not ever get encoded. But they don't seem to be particularly interested in medieval European literature. I press on. Or we have Dr. Joanna Kopacek, head of English and Language and Linguistics, senior lecturer in Scots and English, who wrote this lovely. They didn't seem to be impressed by an actual scholar saying that the proposal was a good one. They're not bad people. It's not a bad committee. Some of them are my friends for many years and all of that. But I don't know. It's just hard sometimes working. They all live in a particular corporate culture in California. And that's how they think about things. And getting past that or around that, sometimes involves years of begging, or sometimes it involves finding some sort of answer as to what kind of sequence they might propose. And I'll be doing that. I'll be writing. It's like, well, I mean, if you think that the sequence should be long S and S, then you can't have a capital form, and that fails. And so we're back to, like, encode it, please. I'm pretty sure we'll succeed for this. I'm not sure that we'll succeed for this, but we had better. This is another character that I discovered, and this is also typographically interesting, and I don't know why that A is in purple. I discovered a thing called the combining overcurl. Now, in medieval manuscripts in Britain, a line or a breve or a fermata over things means an M or an N is being omitted. And you'll usually find these things, well, unless it's being doubled, you'll have, double M, double M, double M, double N, double N, double N. Those are all the same. They all mean the same thing. This and this and this do not mean different things, but paleographically we can distinguish them because the scribe was doing this, or he was doing this, or he was doing this and putting a dot in it. Is that important? Well, it can be, or at least it's there for us to be able to make use of. And, so here we are, and these are there. And what I found is that there's another thing where at the end of a word, but sometimes in the middle of a word, this thing just sort of swings up and over. And the thing about this is that these ones always mean an M or an N. Well, okay, sometimes this one can mean some other kind of suspension. So they'll write Jesus, IHS, and put this through the H, and that's not a nasalization mark, but it's a different kind of suspension mark. But anyway, it's encoded, and we know how to do that. These things are really, really interesting, because sometimes they mean an M or an N, and you have to know the language to know whether it is an M or an N, but sometimes they don't mean anything at all, it's just the pen went up that way. And that differs from all of these, because all of these are always meaningful, but these are polyvalent, and sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. And R, with the thing over it particularly, is not usually RN or RM. It's either nothing or RE. And you find this very, very often in Middle English texts. The others are, I'm not sure where I found that one. The others are found in the Cornish text that I've been looking at, and also now I'm finding them in Middle Scots, so it goes all up Britain. And a couple of months ago, I was in Ghent and was talking to a paleographer there. And he said, oh, everybody knows about this curl. You never find it on the continent. It's only in Britain. So it's a particularly unique kind of thing. The objection that they gave was that, usually when we have a combining mark that fuses with the letter, we encode the whole thing as a unit. And that's actually a good idea for a cedilla or an Ogoniec or anything like that, because it is going to be typographically better. But we have actually encoded this mark here for the use of paleographers, which normally does attach and fuse. It's an ease. So this is cease and dies and fees and geese and keys and rees, and that's another rees, and strees, sorry. And here's an example. I was trying to show them. It's like, yes, in good medieval paleography typography, and yeah, how many of the UI fonts are supporting any of the characters in the medieval paleography block? No. But even if the proper ligation isn't supported, it's legible. You wouldn't really necessarily even notice, okay, there's a little break there. Okay, the D kind of, there is no massive difference between these things. It works kind of okay, and it's fine. The objection that was given to me was like, well, the Google Noto fonts, it's going to be really hard for people to do this. It's like, we encode scripts with massive conjunct characters. The scripts of any of the Brahmic scripts and the Arabic things, and we try to, I'm not doing whether they did the Arabic right. What the heck has happened? I didn't do that. Did I? I must have. I did. I touched a button. But their argument was like, how will Noto fonts support this? It's like, you can look at there's a whole block of medieval paleography stuff, and the number of fonts which actually support them is, if it's a dozen, I'll be surprised. It certainly isn't. No, they don't. So I just saw this as, you just don't like this character. I mean, are we going forward? Why are we not going forward? There's more. There we go. So I was trying to say, it's like, okay, let me tell you the rule. The rule is very simple. Any reasonable fusion that respects a font style should be acceptable, right? You don't need to have this little ring. I put it there because I thought it looked better in Baskerville. I made this fusion. And I said to them, it's really, any reasonable fusion, anything that's convenient, the typographer is free to do what the typographer may wish. In fact, in the actual manuscripts, the Y with the overcurl happens to look like this. But that's because the ductus of the Y in this particular hand, in this Cornish manuscript, happens to look like this. So naturally, he's going to do that. But naturally, that isn't what we have here, so we're going to do something else. And isn't that pretty? I think it's pretty. I think that one's not very pretty. And I should fix it, and that has a winding error. Crap. So I said, these are the things that I've actually found. This is an E. That's an A, E, I, M, N, R, S, T. I guess that's a U because they're identical anyway. And then the Y. It's like, so, we don't worry about this and this, it's not the same handwriting that we have. And so I said, look, here's the letters A to Z, and behold, I have shown them, and I said we can make a Unicode technical note, and crap, there's winding errors, sorry. We can make a Unicode technical note so that when we encode this, anybody who wants to support this character can look at the Unicode technical and go, okay, I'll make my F go fuse like that, because it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because this is the reality, and the point is that this isn't identical to the other suspension marks. It's a unique thing because it might be representing a nasal, or it might just be decorative, and you can't tell without knowing the language, and that's why it's of paleographic interest. And then I said, and behold, look, if you've designed your base character, even when the typographic fusion doesn't work, you can still read it. And legibility is the whole point of plain text, right? I mean, yeah, this isn't gorgeous, but I don't care. Right? What I want to be able to do is represent what's in my data. I might want to be able to count the number of these accented, these diacritical marks, comparing them to the other ones. And by the way, the overline is the most common, and this is a third of much common, and the other ones are half as common as even this one. So this is even more important than the other ones we already encoded. I only have 3 more slides, which is fine. This has been another recent fight, which so far we've weirdly lost. In the Norse tradition, you have a thorn with a horizontal bar for it, and this was encoded years ago. And we thought that it was suitable for Old English manuscripts as well. But almost all of the Old English manuscripts, really all of them, seriously, have it as a diagonal. And we actually, Andrew West and I, he did most of the research on that, produced a document showing that the Norse tradition of representing thorn, it's an abbreviation for a word which means that. It's that in English, and it's thought and thes in Old Norse. And we were able to show there's about 100 years of tradition of doing this up in Norway. And this is what was in the code chart. But we went back to the Elizabethan era. We have 400 years of showing this for Old English in font after font after font after font. And they just didn't like it. They said, but this is a glyph variant. And then we showed them other examples, like there's the letter U with a horizontal stroke through it and the letter U with a diagonal stroke through it. And those are not used contrastively in any one language. One is used for some Native American language, and the other is used for, I don't know what, something else, some phonetic thing or something. It doesn't make any difference, because the point is that, this line and this line. Ultimately, right now, this is still stalled. I'm not going to give up, because what they've done is they said, well, if this is more common, we'll just change the glyph. Well, the thing is, there's this thing called the Medieval Unicode Font Initiative, and they use the private use area for a lot of things. And this is an encoded character, thorn with stroke, and we wanted to encode thorn with diagonal stroke. That hasn't been encoded. But in the movie recommendations, and so the number of people who make medieval fonts have implemented that, this one is in the private use area, and then this one is in the encoded area. Well, now the Unicode Consortium is changing so that this is going to be the glyph in the encoded area, meaning that even though this is only used, both of these things are only used by medievalists, they are now, by fiat, invalidating, you're laughing, Tom, invalidating all of the medievalist fonts that have followed the medieval Unicode font initiative standard, which is not a good idea. But ultimately, somebody says, no, they're glyph variants of the same thing. It's like, well, you say that, but we're showing you all these examples where they're like culturally and socially different. And it's like, can't you use OpenType? It's like, well, no, because medievalists might be Germanicists, and they might want to quote Old Norse paleography and Old English paleography at the same time, right? Oh, well, that didn't come out very well. And this is all I'm going to say about emojis. I think they encoded a veggie sore and a meaty sore. And I think that we need more sores, but they don't want to do that. And then I will end with the last of the emojis. Long ago, when we first dumped the emojis into the standard, it was because Japanese telephone companies had put them into their phones, and it was starting to leak into data, and I guess Google wanted to catalog the data. And so that's why we have emojis at all. And this was long before the iPhone put them in anything, and long before any of them got skin color or hair or genders or any of that stuff. And back at that time, I was representing Ireland in the ISO stuff. So Unicode is the industrial part of the standard, and then there's an international standards organization side, which could use more French and Dutch and German participation, please. Because on the ISO side, it has dwindled. The number of countries participating has dwindled. And so basically, we have less power than the industrial ones do. The problem is that the industrial guys, in my opinion, are not actually necessarily being reasonable about what they let through and what they don't. And they spend a lot of time with things like this, which is fine. I like emojis as much as the next person, and I'm sorry about the pixelation there. That's just a screenshot. But way back then, Ireland and Germany and the UK, when we were first putting in stuff, we said in our national ballot comments, if you want to dump these things into the standard because there's just a bunch of pictures that some guys in some offices in some telephone companies in Japan made, if you want to put this in, then we would like to augment the set by adding some things. It's kind of like the price that you will pay for having us agree to this sort of thing. And they let us do that. And then as time went on, they put in the webdings and wingdings, and the webdings included a bunch of thumbs pointing in different directions. And that's when Ireland proposed this, and this, and this, and that's why those are there. Well, actually, most of the companies don't do this one, which irritates us in Britain, but because this is a little less strong than the other one. But nowadays, they're not letting us do this. So, for instance, this very, very important character in our political universe now was, I proposed it in Irish ballot comments, and they said, no, we have an emoji process now. No, you must go to the trouble of writing a proposal and, do the Google heuristics for the word troll and blah, 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 blah. So we ended up doing that because they didn't want to accept that the ISO side should be able to have as much power. We weren't even asking for it to be colored and emojified. We were just asking it to be an additional character in the standard, although clearly the world needs an emoji for troll. We have troll farms. Heaven help us. Anyway, this is now being accepted. It was not accepted because of Irish ballot comments. It was accepted because we ended up doing this, and probably they say we shouldn't accept this, but well, they've now gone through the trouble of making the thing as a... But they've accepted it for the next version of the standard, which means that it's currently on a ballot, but they want to take it off the ballot and put it on the next ballot because they don't want the two standards to be out of sync, even though they're often out of sync on their own. I don't know. Be happy when you find this on your phones, though, and use it to shame the evil ones, because there's too many trolls in the world. That's really all I have So this says thank you, and this says bedankt in runes, because I like runes. And